And welcome. Let us all, as is our custom, we will start with a short meditation to help us to get settled. Before I do that, is anyone here for the first time? Tell us who you are in the chat. I recognize most people. If anyone is a newcomer though, please say hello.
Hello, all right, I'm trying.
Sam, you're in Pittsburgh. Hi, Sam, welcome. So nice of you to join us today. Okay, now we shall get going on our meditation. John, second time, glad you can make it. All right, so everyone please relax in your seat and close your eyes and take in a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And again, inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. As you go at your own pace of inhaling through the nose and holding, and exhaling through the mouth and holding. If thoughts should come into your head, just observe them and let them go. Like watching a car move past on the road. Now is not the time for solving problems. Right now, all you need to do is inhale through the nose and hold, and exhale through the mouth and hold. And on your next inhale, say to yourself, Shema, and on the exhale, listen. Shema, listen. In Shema, we're listening deeply, without judgment, without offering advice. In Shema, we are listening with an open heart. Shema, listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Well, friends, today we are going to be focusing on the soul trait of, it's called Yirah, and Yirah is a complicated soul trait, which the word doesn't really translate from Hebrew into English. It can be translated as fear or as awe. And so we're actually going to be on this one for 2 weeks. The first week we'll focus on the fear aspect. And then next week we will be focusing on the awe aspect. Okay, so can you see the screen? Great. Once again, here's our journey where we have come from. Some of you, this is your first time. Some of you have been here many times. These are all available on video if you'd like to go back and check them out. But we've been spending a week on each of these traits, and a number of these come together and influence how we sort of show up in terms of Yirah. Similar to last week, where when we were working on equanimity, we said, well, what are some of these other traits that impact our ability to stay in the moment and not to get carried away with our emotions? So for our initial discussion, I'm going to put out this saying from Proverbs, which I shared in the blog post, the email for the week. I may have a volunteer to unmute yourself and read this, please.
I'd be happy to. So the prudent person sees trouble head and hides, but the naive continue on and suffer the consequences. Proverbs 22:3.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm curious, like, what does that kind of bring up for you? And there, I know for me, there's a lot. I can look at the society around us and look at decisions that other people have made. How might you see this showing up in your own life? Because with Mussar, of course, we're on a personal journey, and we're trying to figure out how we sometimes can fall into these traps.
I'll say it just reminds me, about all the young people who are not, social distancing and wearing masks, and a lot of people not wearing masks in my neighborhood. A lot of people are, so just, there's certain things you can do to protect yourself, and if you don't pay attention to that, you might get sick.
Yeah.
And terrible consequence.
Right, thank you. And I like that this translation says naive. I don't know whether it's a translation issue or whether that's actually the Hebrew, but sometimes Proverbs will say, but the fool continues on. And, when we look at younger people, there is a certain invincibility, there's a certain naivete that can come into place. And the prefrontal cortex, where we sort of have the ability to look ahead and to understand consequences fully, doesn't completely develop until the age of 25. So when we were young, we would sort of fall into this much more often. Young people today are not taking things seriously. So yeah, other thoughts.
Hard to learn if you're not facing the troubles. Therefore, it takes a lot of courage to be that open, naive fool. But like you said, as we gain experience, and I think it's the experience of facing our fears, facing the unknown, facing the challenges, that brings us that maturity that allows us to learn very strongly and take care of ourselves. It's not an easy journey, and young people especially, and myself included when I was younger, lots of mistakes, but I learned.
Yeah, thank you. I'm fascinated by the connection to courage, and that brings up a lot of thoughts in my head, but I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about how courage sort of comes into play with this.
Courage takes a lot of depth. Courage takes a lot of ignoring the anxiety or ignoring some of the fear and focus on the positives. What will I learn from this? How can I do this and benefit myself, but then in turn perhaps benefit others? To have the courage to take on an experience that's tough is inspirational, I think, for a lot of people, to when you're able to be the witness of that, to vibrationally, or just in your own heart or your own spirit, to hold yourself in a place of courage. It takes a lot of conviction.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm also reminded of the old saying, ignorance is bliss. So near me at UC Berkeley, there are all these fraternity parties, which have really jeopardized the ability of the school to reopen because of a bunch of COVID cases. And it's like, yeah, we're fine, let's have a party. And, it's much easier, young people have an excuse to some degree, but it's also sort of not facing up to, a stark reality, saying, hey, there's a danger here. Because I think any of us at any age can put our head in the sand sometimes. And you're right, I love that there's courage not to do that. Janet, I saw you had a comment.
Yeah, I don't know that the prudent person hides. I think You've got risk averse versus risky. And which is kind of what comes into play in your chapter. I see a brave person will not hide, will probably take some kind of action. And maybe, and you know, the leader is not going to hide either. I mean, it's a question, do you want to be the lemming, or do you know, you can be at either end of the spectrum, it's not good.
Right. Yeah, so this is talking about a specific type of person where there's this definition of a prudent person, but there's other cousins of that where you're seeing trouble ahead and you're deciding what's the right action for me to take. Sometimes it's like, you know, I need to get out there and protest, even though there is some risk of, you know, people are being there, or I need to speak up, you know, in the workplace, even though there's a risk to my.
Yeah, the Reverend Martin Luther King did not hide.
But I can imagine, what are some times just for the group where it might be just prudent to say, you know what, there's some trouble ahead and it's better for me to sit this one out?
It's a very individual, definitely a very individual decision, because we don't really know maybe that person, without judging them, of course, maybe they're immune compromised in case of COVID, for example. They need to be prudent on a very big way and do need to literally hide.
Right.
Their experiences that they have, you know, they might get ill. So that wouldn't be a bad thing. And no, and that they have complete right to voice it or not voice it, or just take care of themselves. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Sometimes it's just a good idea to walk away from trouble. Just to go the other way. A good example is this family member and that family member are arguing, and if you step in between Mr. and Mrs. there, you know, your brother and your sister-in-law say, all you're going to get is both of them mad at you. And you're not going to help anything. So sometimes it's best to just walk away. Or even if they're going after you, sometimes it's best to just walk away and let everything calm down. And then work out a plan. But that's the thing. The prudent person sees trouble ahead and hides or walks away or makes a plan. Because if you don't have a plan, I mean, Janet referenced Martin Luther King, and I'll reference John Lewis, who said, get in good trouble. But they had a plan. They knew what they were doing. They weren't just crashing in there.
Right, I love that, yeah. It's understanding, and you know, this relates to kind of part of, you know, what I call the fear of consequences. It's understanding that, you know, actions do have consequences. And if you just sort of show up and there's some kind of bad situation going on, you know, you should have a plan. You should have some knowledge that, okay, you know, I'm reminded of, you know, the Han Solo, you know, I have a bad feeling about this, you know, like sometimes we need to just kind of have our senses up.
Also to know why. To know why you're doing it, that there's a reason that you're taking this risk. It's not just, you know, like these people that walk into places without masks and get into these brouhahas with the clerk because they say, we won't serve you without a mask. And then they end up getting, I mean, at best, they get their picture all over Facebook. At worst, they might get arrested. And that's not thinking. That's not thinking.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I'm going to move us on to our next idea. As we do every week, we look at one of our 4 assumptions as it relates to the soul trait. And the one for this idea of the conflict between the evil inclination and the good inclination. Again, the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, that's our emotional center that's absolutely plugged into fear. And we are biologically wired to react. We react 100 times more quickly with a fear response than we do with a rational response. So there's something very, very strong about this. It's very innate. It's a good thing because it keeps us from, there's like a bunch of people hanging around on this street. It's late at night. Nobody else is around. Maybe I should call a cab. Who knows? There are reasons to, for that. But there's also a lot of baggage that comes with that in terms of judging others, in terms of being selfish. And it's the good inclination that that allows us to feel compassion and to connect with others. I'd be curious if anyone has any thoughts. How do the evil inclination and the good inclination relate to this idea of the fear of consequences?
Survival. That's the first thing that comes up for me when I think of that.
Okay. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, I think of it from the place of kind of what you said, Greg. The human body, it from a very simple level, from a very animalistic level, its prime reason wants to keep oneself safe. Mm-hmm. And depending on, I think, those experiences from your past, again, I think it's an individual thing. If you can't trust or don't feel you can trust that group of people late at night on the street and you want to take the cab, I think there's a good reason why you want to do that, and you should. I think a different person might have a different set of circumstances from their past about fear. They might trust themselves differently and walk right down the sidewalk and go home fine. The human body psyche to on a trail and slip and off the edge of a trail and grab a branch. I mean, that's fear-based, right? I'm going to survive. So instinctively, you go out to reach something to save the body from falling. Having fear there isn't necessarily all a bad thing, because it does want to protect us, as long as it comes from, I think, from a place of love. That sounds a bit maybe deep, but but I think this group understands that if you love yourself to a certain degree, if you an action you need to take to keep yourself safe, and fear comes up to indicate that, I honestly think that can be a good thing. I don't think that necessarily has to be a bad thing.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. And I love your point about self-esteem and self-love. And when we don't have that, we become so much, we can fall prey to, we can slip from a healthy fear response, which shows up every once in a while, to a constant fear response that everything is a threat against us in some way.
Yes.
How about this idea of planning? Is that related to the good inclination and evil inclination?
I think it is related to the good inclination, and also I guess we were talking about equanimity, and whereas the evil inclination, this just popped up in my head. I forgot his name, Chip Wilson. The devil made me buy that dress, it's like it was out of my control. It's like giving up any control and just go with your emotions or your urges or whatever. So, yeah, planning could help you, be more aware and not just wild and going off wildly.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. That absolutely makes sense. As part of our brain, it's like, run, do something. And then there's the good inclinations, like, wait, hang on a second. We have 5 seconds to kind of make a plan and evaluate and decide, is this the time to kind of get between the warring couple, or is this the time to go grab a cup of coffee and just kind of get out of the way? And that's kind of where that good inclination, evil inclination, you know, can sort of come into play. Absolutely. Anyone else who maybe we haven't heard from yet have any thoughts about this, or should I? Yes.
When we were going over this, I was remembering that story from the Talmud about them bringing the Yetzer Hara out of the temple, you know, because the rabbis had prayed that maybe they could kill it or get rid of it or something. And they brought it out and tied it up for 3 days. I mean, the story ends by saying, after 3 days, not an egg was laid. And I think the implication of that is that without self-interest, we're not motivated to do things.
Yeah.
Have to have some interest, and you can call that selfish, but without it, we're not getting anything done. So it ends up being kind of a balance between, you know, self-interest and having some rational control over that as well. But we need both.
Thank you, John. That is great. That is such an amazing story. Thanks for bringing that into this conversation, because it's not even, that's why I don't like the translation evil. It was sort of the best one that I knew at the time. You know, if I were to rewrite the book, I might call it like the hostile impulse, because it's not a bad thing in and of itself unless it's driving the car all the time. And you know, sometimes you need it to grab that branch if you're falling over the cliff. But your subconscious can't tell the difference between when you're falling over a cliff and when, you know, it's just somebody said something that puts you on the defensive. And that's where we can get into trouble.
Isn't the evil inclination, the concern with it is more about excess? That we need that. Like we need the sex drive, for example. But in excess, it's not a good thing.
Yes.
We need to eat, but gluttony is not a good idea.
That is absolutely part of it. I don't know if that's all of it, but that is a really big and important piece of understanding the evil inclination. All right, so let's come back to this idea of Yirah. As I said before, it doesn't translate to English directly. It can mean either fear or awe. And so below, oops, sorry about that. Below here are, can you see the screen? Yeah, okay, great. So there's Yirah of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And then there's a version that says fear of the Lord and another version that says awe of the Lord. What's the difference? Like, what's the different valence if you're sort of focusing on the fear of the Lord as the beginning? Well, first of all, what does this mean? And then how does it matter whether you think of it as fear or awe?
Hold on.
I would think that fear would create a block from thinking.
Where all kind of opens you up.
Yeah, all opens you up. Yeah.
I definitely prefer to let the definition of awe of the Lord. However, I can understand where sometimes fear can open up a person to recognize that they don't want to be in fear. I just think it would be hard to recognize that definition where I recognize the definition of awe, like awe almost feels like that epiphany of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fear can bring on epiphanies, but not always. So, yeah.
When I think when I think of the idea of fear, awe, and love, I think of my relationship with the ocean. I'm scared to death of those waves. They're very scary. I'm totally in awe of the vastness of it, and I love it.
Right.
That's a
I
very
love that. That's lovely.
that's a very concrete example or metaphor, even.
I love
But
that. I think it's beautiful. Yes.
I see nature as God's manifestation, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So it works
Yeah.
for me.
Thank you, Carol. And I like that you bring nature in because, many people sort of struggle with the idea of God anyway. And so as soon as we start talking about fear of the Lord or awe of the Lord, I don't know how everybody feels on this call, but some people, can even just start to check out there. And so it can mean, if you're one of these people who isn't sure about the divinity, you can think about nature, you can think about spirit or something bigger than ourselves. A lot of the times the liturgy, if you're seeing like a phrase, fear of God or fear of the law, the phrase is Yirah. And I do wish, I know a lot of like the traditional Mussar literature, like Rabbi Israel Salanter, for example, he was the head of the Mussar movement in Lithuania and really took it to a whole new level, but he was very fire and brimstone in his writing. He really just would go to town on this idea of fear of God, and we gotta sort of maintain our fear of God, and that I find it much harder to relate to that. But nonetheless, I do like studying this idea because we've talked about the difference between fear and awe. Why is this the beginning of wisdom? Does that make any sense, or does that just seem out to lunch?
I mean, I think that if people think that there's nothing bigger than themselves and their own ego, they might be do a lot of really foolish things. And maybe actual fear of something greater than themselves, whether it's nature, like there's a big storm coming and you don't want to go out in your boat today on the water, or, anything like that. But, but also if you believe that there's consequences for your actions, maybe that would help put a check on you're doing something bad or foolish or dangerous.
Yeah, we don't want to be that person who's, the hurricane's coming in and they're living on the sort of barrier islands and they say evacuate, and there's always that one person who says, I'm not going to leave my house, and sometimes they really don't leave their house.
Yeah, they don't do anything.
Yeah, they get washed away, and it becomes a tragic situation. There's something I think, when I was a biologist, I always used to like to read something called the Darwin Awards, which was given to someone who removes themselves from the gene pool from their stupidity. So the person who tied the flaming rocket to the top of their car and blew up or something, really. But
Really dumb,
giant class 5 hurricanes heading in, and you decide you're going to stick it out. That's not having a proper respect for the power of nature. That is a great example.
I tend to lean towards panentheistic views of God. But when I reflect on this, and I think, we're thinking about not long ago, that view and thinking, what percentage of insect species do I understand or know of? 1%, 1/10 of 1%? I might not know 1/100th of 1% of the insect species on the earth. So when I reflect on a kind of panentheistic view of God, when I know that little about the creation that I'm within, then I feel awestruck by the tremendous amount of everything there is and how small both I am and my own comprehension of that is.
Mm.
That's very humbling, isn't it? Yeah, I agree with that.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that we don't understand, and that can bring an awe, and sometimes it should bring a fear.
Mhm.
Healthy fear. Yeah, healthy fear is good. I still say
Yeah.
healthy fear can be good.
Yeah.
Totally. You know, we need to have a healthy fear of what this is.
I was thinking, I've been gardening. One of the things I've been doing during this difficult time is planting seeds. Um, Seedlings do not turn overnight into sunflowers. They take, they take nurturing. You have this little speck. It's nothing more than a speck. And it can become an onion or maybe a flower or something like that. I don't, all I do is put water there, but I didn't create the energy that enables that little speck to turn into an onion or a flower or a carrot, you know?
Mm.
But I'm a partner with it.
Too right.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Very good.
Let's take a look at the spectrum of fear, or the fear of consequences. You know, what happens at the extremes?
Well, I guess you can be, like it says, paralyzed from doing it.
Mhm.
And too much fear can be very isolating as well, which is, I think, what we're seeing in some of the COVID stuff right now, of course.
Right. Yeah, so being very fearful can be isolating.
Yeah.
Yes, some people are still at home, haven't ventured out, you know,
Yeah.
maybe for a walk. A lot of people in my school don't want to go to indoor services, even though it's 90 something, you know, by 10:30. They'd rather stay outside.
Mm.
Um, you know, which I, you know, even with masks and everything, I would think it's that they're maybe too afraid. But
And then the too little side is I think that immature or impulsive,
mhm.
thoughtless. And not, when I mean thoughtless, I don't mean thoughtless, and I don't mean that word in a judgmental way. I mean, it's just not in their awareness. That's a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
Um,
What do we do? Thank you, Wendy. What do we do if we get, if we find ourselves maybe in that place where thinking, am I being too afraid here? I'm feeling sort of paralyzed. I'm feeling sort of afraid all the time. What are some of the things that we might bring to bear to kind of deal with some of those feelings? Rainey, I saw you unmuted. I didn't know if that was because you wanted to make a comment or you just happened to be unmuted.
I don't know. I think it's sometimes we have to challenge ourselves to do something that we're afraid to do.
I think of our fear also, I agree with that, comes from a fear of if we stay to the too much isolating or too much, you know, the risk, when it paralyzes us, is too isolating. When we're too impulsive, it's unawareness, and it's can be reckless, like your screen says. To find a balance between the two, I think there is a feeling of rejection on either end. I think you feel like you will be rejected for your courage, or you'll feel rejected if you're not isolating it. I think that's the big thing inside of people that they're not maybe addressing, is the fear of rejection of your opinion about taking care of yourself during these times, the fear of saying too much and being, you know, again, rejected for your opinion, the fear of you know, hiding yourself away, and then also like, are people thinking I'm crazy by doing this? There's a lot of self-judgment, I think, that happens when you're trying to sort the balance between the two.
Thank you. Again, I like the way you keep bringing this back to kind of our own internal world and our own internal situation. What about this phrase, fearing consequences? You know, fear consequences, but not action. What's the difference? And how might that help?
Fear consequences, but not action. Right. One of my old therapists used to say this thing: feel the fear, but do it anyway. Like you can maybe live with some fear, but still try to reach out, or whatever it is that you're blocked about or fearful of.
You can't have bravery without fear.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so sometimes we need to, you know,
Acknowledge
take
it.
action anyway, despite the fear. What is the fear of a consequence? What does that mean?
That you'll be punished, that somehow, again, you'll be judged or punished for an action or a non-action.
Or you could be afraid
That's one
of
possible consequence.
humiliation, or a failure, or rejection, you know, all those things.
Or more literally, you do something, some action. Let's say you take your car on the freeway and you go 100 miles an hour. You should be afraid of those consequences.
Well,
if you crash that car, you could kill somebody, including yourself.
Right.
So there's a lot of fear of consequences in action that's very physical. It's very, very concrete too, besides just rejection and hurt.
Yeah, the punishment part again, and whatever the punishment entails. Yeah.
And it also, you take it a step farther and it becomes acceptance of consequences. Is this fear of consequences? I'm afraid of the consequences, but this risk is worth taking. Like, again, I'll come back to John Lewis. He took a lot of risks and suffered a lot of consequences, but to him it was worth it.
Right.
The work was that important.
Right.
Right.
And I think it's also a way, once you start thinking about consequences, it can help overcome the paralysis, because it's not a fear of just taking action. Is, to me, I see like sort of huddling in the fetal position. Whereas thinking about the consequences, it can be like, all right, well, what's the chance that I'll get in a car accident? What's the chance that somebody's going to make a comment? Is that comment actually so terrible? Because also not acting has consequences too. So then it becomes a trade-off conversation, as opposed to the acting and such could happen, as opposed to not acting and something else could happen. So it's a very different type of valence.
Yes.
I'm going to move us on to the breakout. Once again, to do a check-in and maybe talk about where you're being prudent today and where you are continuing on. Oh, I think I had a different quote. Sorry for that. But the other quote that you can use as a prompt is, everything is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven. So can percolate on those. Let me see, yes, I can open the breakout rooms while that is still up, I think, maybe. Yes, okay. Now, if you get to your breakout room and nobody's there, just hang out, because I'll see that and I'll move you somewhere else. So just keep watching your screen. You should see something coming up now. which says which breakout rooms to join. So just click to join your room, and we shall reconvene here shortly. Leslie, I see your camera's off. I don't know if you're still with us, or Wendy, do you see your breakout room? Shoot, I don't know if my...
Wanted to listen to your talk.
Oh, okay. All right, let me move. Well, I actually didn't prepare a little talk today because I wasn't sure that people were going to give them. So I was just going to rest. So today might be a good day to, well, what the heck, I'll give a little talk. I got some slides we're not going to get to. Okay, there we go. So I will do a little bonus talk today. Let's see, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about what the rabbis, I guess this is in the book, Orchat Sadakim, the ways of the Sadakim. And when it's talking about fear, and fear of heaven, it says there are some things that we should fear. The first is that someone who's wise in Torah must worry that their deeds are not commensurate with their wisdom. Second, if they're not wise, they must worry about not having the ability to probe their spiritual curriculum. The third, if they're honored, they must be heedful not to rejoice in that honor. And the fourth is if they're wise and yet despised in the eyes of the world, they should worry that being despised will prevent people from accepting their advice. So I'm going to talk about these. I'm going to start with the one on the bottom, because when I was in the corporate world, I'm a smart guy and I was very good at getting things done, but I was also very arrogant. And I should have taken this as a red flag that I would get a lot of feedback on my reports that I should be doing more. I should be doing better at connecting people because a lot of people didn't like working with me. And that really did prevent people from taking my advice and taking my recommendations. And when things got kind of ugly and things didn't go well, people didn't have my back. So I think that's a very important point that we should all pay attention to, is that if you're good at what you're doing, but people don't like you, then you really need to look in the mirror and figure out, why is that the case? If I'm so good, why is it that people aren't wanting to work with me or aren't wanting to work around me? That's related to the third one, where I would get accolades for doing a good job and being honored, but I let that get to my head. I'd say, I'd get a swell head. I was rejoicing in that honor, and that honor became a motivation in and of itself. It's something in Mussar we call chasing honor. It's not a healthy thing to do. We want to do things for their own sake, for the sake of doing a good job. And we want to maintain a good relationship with the people around us while we're doing that. So to continue up, if someone isn't wise, and even if they are, we should still think about that, which is we should have the ability to look in at our own faults and our own spiritual curriculum. Again, what I've been talking about is my spiritual curriculum, which was this weakness for chasing honor, or this arrogance, which was preventing me from, which was alienating other people from me. So whether one is wise or not, we really do need to have the courage and that ability to probe their spiritual curriculum. And even if we're not wise and we're not accomplished, this is still something that we can do. And then the last one is that given talents, we want to make sure that we are using them appropriately. There's a great story about the Rabbi Israel Salanter, where he was asked to testify at a trial. And they asked him, you know, it says you have the wisdom of, or the intelligence of 1,000 men. Is that true? And he said, yes, it's true. And they said, well, that's not a very humble thing to say. And he said, well, I'm under oath. What do you expect me to say? But then he went on to say, however, because I have the intelligence of 1,000 men, I also have the responsibility for repairing the world that's 1,000 times of that of other men. So whatever the talents that we were gifted and that we have, we need to be using those in a way that impacts the world to the good. Having talents doesn't mean that we have the right to lord them over other people. It means we have a responsibility to share them with other people. So that's my hidden teaching for today. I am now going to thank you, Leslie, for kind of hanging out. I always wonder, do people actually watch these or what? So I'm going to start closing the breakout rooms to invite people to start coming back. I'm going to stop the share. So people must be really in depth with their conversations. And here we are. Welcome back, everyone. So how were your discussions? Would anyone like to share kind of an insight they had about themselves or something that was top of mind from that conversation?
Well, we ended up talking about anti-Semitism and where does that come from? How is that fear-driven? And just, it's kind of an unresolvable in the long run, but how much of that is fear-driven and misinformation and propaganda that are driving that?
That's interesting.
Thank you.
Greg,
Yeah.
this is Leanie Cohen. So I was part of that same conversation, and there's something that's been really pulling at me the last few days. I found out that 2 synagogues in my town were defaced with swastikas and all kinds of hateful things printed on them, painted on. I've really been struggling with the Yetzer Hara, that evil inclination. I remember you had that spectrum diagram that you always have. And, I just don't quite understand the personality of somebody who does those kinds of hateful things. And what I was saying to the folks is that I try to at least have some level of compassion that perhaps they were raised maybe with this hateful thing being all around them or whatever, but it's hard for me to get to that place of forgiveness.
Well, thank you, Lainey. This is a really important topic, and it's something which unfortunately we're having to deal with more and more. So there's a couple of things. I want to distinguish between this idea of having compassion and forgiveness, because I would like to offer that we can have compassion for someone else, but that doesn't mean we need to forgive them. Those are very different things. And I think part of that has to do, well, there's two things. One, that Judaism says that you don't need to forgive unless the other person apologizes. And not only do they need to apologize, they need to make restitution. They need to say they're never going to do it again. So until those, now in Christianity, you're just supposed to forgive people. And we live in a Christian culture, so sometimes that idea seeps into our understanding. But from a Jewish perspective, we're not required to forgive people who aren't repentant. You know, that's the whole thing with, now sometimes we may wish to anyway, because if that anger is kind of destroying us. But, and I think that relates a little bit to consequences too. How does consequences sort of connect to this idea of forgiveness and compassion, you know, especially when we look at something like, you know, defacing of synagogues or anti-Semitic acts?
You know, it might be that.
Forgiveness can only come, yeah, if you can forgive the feeling of what it created inside of you when you see that. If you can forgive the people that did it, all the more power to you. I don't know if I could, but I can forgive myself for the feelings that it created inside of me, about the feeling of anger, disrespect, shock. I don't like that. That's like, it's disrespectful. It sends a very sad message. I have to forgive myself for those feelings because I don't know and understand where all those old feelings come from, but they're from the past, they're from past experiences, they're going to be from past stories, all those history. That's what I'm forgiving. That's what I'm trying to forgive from inside myself, my part in it maybe, or not, or I don't know. But if I can do that for myself, that's the only way I can find compassion for that kind of situation. And do I forgive them? Probably not. I probably will try to, but I won't forget. And if I do forgive, it's just I won't forget. That's the only way I can do it. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but.
I was going to say, I think some of these defacings, you know, might be from bad actors, but some of them, I mean, well, I guess they're all bad actors, but some of them might be out of ignorance, you know, and I could forgive ignorance more than just spite and hatefulness, you know, but you don't know why somebody did something unless you find out, you know, but just these people who go around, you know, attacking people at synagogues and that kind of thing. I can't have compassion for them.
It's very attention seeking on one level. I don't get it. I don't get it. Wrong kind of attention.
Me, it's evil. I mean, it's just evil.
Yeah.
But it's what Mussar has to say about just outright evil, you know, good, you know.
I went to a seminar that my cousin gave, actually, talking about the Diary of Anne Frank. She does work with the Anne Frank House in the Netherlands. And she made a very relevant statement that we need to be cautious about using a phrase of absolute evil or outright evil, because, like in relation to the Nazis, for example, because it can preclude us from wondering, how do people get to a state where they could do that? Or how do people get to a state where they could be a bystander?
I hear the attitude of staying open and curiosity so that we can still learn from it, so we don't take ourselves down that road ever again. I think that's what your friend's trying to say, I think.
Yeah. I want to come back to Leni's other question, though, which was, you know, I don't get what's going on with this anti-Semitism, and I don't get it, and why would people do that? And in my first year of rabbinical school, I took two wonderful classes by the Professor Bob Levy of blessed memory. One was medieval Jewish history, one was modern Jewish history, and we studied, and it was almost all about anti-Semitism, unfortunately. And where we got to, and what he really taught us, was that anti-Semitism is irrational. Like, at its core, like, you know, Jews in Germany were simultaneously controlling society and we're the left-wing anarchists destroying society. So that's irrational. You can't be controlling society and destroying society at the same time. You know, that's, so a lot of the stuff that's driving people, it's not rational. And then from my standpoint, whether I can be compassionate towards someone, it's like, wow, I really feel bad for someone who got so twisted that they're being driven by all these irrational conspiracy theories. But that doesn't mean I'm going to, at the same time, though, I'm going to do everything in my power to put that person in jail, to prevent that person from getting power, to make sure that poison doesn't spread to other people. Because especially at a time like now of social upheaval and national upheaval, when people are vulnerable and they're scared, they can be vulnerable to being infected by these irrational poisons. Especially if it's kind of an underlying trope that's part of the society. And it can be plugged back in. Janos, I see you have your...
So you know what? I do believe it's a terrible thing that these things are happening. But I think mostly they're happening when people are in a group. When you are in a part of the group, people lose their rationality, they lose the feeling of responsibility, so they just go with the flow. And there is, if somebody has an ignorance and hatred, whatever, and they go in that direction, very funny how the masses will follow and do the same. It's very tragic for me that how easily we lose ourselves, who we are, and lose our values and morals and everything we have when we are in a group. They're just partially the problem, maybe. That's what I think.
Thank you.
So how would Mussar look at an act like this? Can you comment on that?
So Mussar is always like, again, looking at the self. Like, how am I showing up in the situation? Like, what is, I'm going to pull up, this may or may not work. I'm just curious where it's going to take us here. But it's this idea of this list of soul traits. Okay, so someone has put a swastika on a synagogue. You know, which soul trait do I bring into play to deal with this?
Honor.
Say more. How so?
In honor, oh my goodness, yeah, if you're too proud or too prideful versus that balance of self-respect. And you don't have to agree with everyone that's outside in your world, but you don't always have to say anything either, which kind of leads to the next one, which says silence. Yeah, I think if you have too much pride or you're too proudful, that's where you get into you're respecting them too much.
Right, so we would, I mean, this might be what you're saying, but what that's making me think about is, okay, if I'm too prideful, maybe I'm not going to ask for help. You know,
right.
People.
That's
I'm not going to reach out to others in the community and say, hey, I need you to stand with me against this.
Yeah.
And Mussar gives us guidance for how I should show up when somebody puts a swastika on my synagogue. So it's probably, for example, not a time for patience. Well, this will just blow over. I'm just going to sit and feel bad, and eventually it's going to be okay. You know, it's probably going to take, it requires some kind of action to take.
Yeah.
And this slide I put up, it's put up on the American Mussar Facebook page last week. Something which you can think about, you know, if we're feeling fearful, you know, something has been disrupted potentially, or something can also be brought into bear to help us deal with it. Like, for example, if I'm feeling fearful, maybe saying a prayer is what I need to do. Maybe I need to tap into some greater strength to kind of get strength to deal with the situation. Well, that is, we are out of time for today. So we're going to stop and close with just a short meditation once again. So please, once more, close your eyes. Taking a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. I'd like you to focus on the light that's filtering through your eyelids. This is the light of our divine spark. It's our best self that's always with us. It's always available to give us courage and understanding and that feeling that we're not alone. That there's always something greater that's here with us, whatever we're doing, whatever we're going through. And may we remember our divine spark, that it's always there, and may it help us get through these challenging times.
Amen. Thank you.
When you're ready, you may open your eyes. Thank you all once again so much for being with us today. Next week, we will be focusing on the soul trait of Yirah, which is the next chapter in the spiritual practice of good actions. These sessions are open to anyone of any religion, so please feel free. If you have a friend or colleague you think might be interested, please feel free to bring them along. And if you have any questions in between, please feel free to message me on Facebook or send me an email. So wishing you all a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.